the morning we wake up ready to go. So we're happy to have you all back. This morning, we have Dr. Joy Ingstrom from Loudoun County Public Schools. She is a special education supervisor for autism, and she is a wealth of knowledge. So we welcome her today. So thank you for coming, Dr. Ingstrom.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here. So, Jillian, like I said, this is my first time with Zoom, so bear with me as I navigate this. Is it okay if I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to. I believe they made you a co-host.
Okay.
We all were fairly new to Zoom this week, so you're not the only one.
Is it showing?
Yes.
All right. My only problem is I now can't see the chat box.
We can moderate that.
We can, yeah.
Dr. Ingstrom.
Okay. Yeah, I have two screens up and it's not showing on either screen.
And if I could just say to the group, put your presentation or your view in standard and you'll see the presentation larger. Gallery doesn't work so well for this. Thank you.
Okay, so are we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm glad to be here today. I will say over my years, I've worked with some great PE teachers. And so I'm really excited to share this information with you. So today we're just going to kind of explore autism. I could talk all day about autism, the nuances of it, the impact of it in education, but we have an hour and a half, and so I'm going to try to limit myself. But if you have questions, please ask. You'll also get my contact information at the end, and you're welcome to contact me afterwards if you have specific questions. Happy to help in any way that I can. So a little bit about me. I have my doctorate in special education and disability policy from Virginia Commonwealth University. I also have a certificate in applied behavior analysis from George Mason. I just finished my 1,500 hours of supervision, and so I will be sitting for the board certified behavior analyst exam, hopefully in August. Studying for it right now. So I've had, it took me a while to calculate this. I've had 12 years in public education. So my career started in the Richmond area, and then we moved up north, and I was with Prince William for a little while, and now with Loudoun. Mixed in there, I've had 8 years at the university level or with state programs. So by state programs, I mean like the TTACs that are housed in universities and Virginia Land and things like that. I worked at the university level with Virginia Commonwealth University as an autism coordinator for the Autism Center. That is a free resource to everyone in the state of Virginia. It's the Autism Center for Excellence. They have great trainings if you want to learn more about autism, webinars, lots of resources there. I also adjunct for George Mason. I teach the functional behavior assessment class for them. And then this is I'm going into my 6th year as the special education supervisor for autism programs in Loudoun County Schools. So my position really focuses on the end of the spectrum that requires more support. So those program level kids. I'm also involved a little bit in the kids in the gen ed setting. It just depends on their needs. All right, so that's a little bit about me. So today, our objectives, we're going to talk about the core characteristics of autism. What is required to get a diagnosis? So these are the characteristics that we look for. The impact those characteristics have on education. Understanding the impact of comorbid conditions, so students that have autism and then potentially other disabilities as well. Understanding your role as an educator and a team member. Learning the difference between performance and motivation. And then just going over some strategies, common practices, tiered levels of support for students in the educational setting. So this could be for those students that are in general education PE or those students that are in adapted PE. It's the interventions are pretty global. All right, so I wanted to ask, and now I can't see the chat, so you're going to have to help me, Jillian.
I'll monitor it, no problem.
So I want you, what do you know about autism already? Think about a person that you know or that you know of or that you suspect has autism. And then try to describe that person using one word. And you can put it in the chat.
Routines, anxious, quirky, unsure. Difficult with transitions, focused, singular, variety, artist, disconnected, distracted, focus, regimented, sensitive, sensory issues, different, fixated, creative, literal, repetitive. Someone said the spectrum is so wide. Energy, schedule, routines, socially awkward, lack of eye contact, unique, awesome.
Okay, great. Those are great words. But if you look at that list of words that you all just put in there, you're describing someone with autism. You're also describing a standard neurotypical kid. Our kids that are exceptional, that are gifted learners, they're quirky too, you know, and they don't have a disability. They're creative. They're all those, they can be fixated, all those things. So the same characteristics that define a student with autism also define our typical kids. And so I always want you to think of a student with autism. They are a general education student first. First and foremost, they are a general education student. And we need to treat them as such and try to incorporate them into their education as much as we would a typical student, and then accommodate for the autism characteristics that they may have. So when we talk about a spectrum, the autism spectrum is a huge spectrum. It ranges from very impacted students who may have no ability to communicate, who may have significant behavioral challenges, who may perform significantly below grade level. And then as we move through that continuum, we see higher levels of performance. To the total opposite end, where the student looks atypical or looks typical, performs typically, speaks typically, they just have a couple nuances. They may struggle more with the social piece, or they may have a little difference in their communication style, but their cognitive ability is average to above average. These might be where our twice exceptional kids fall. So they're gifted and they have autism. So it is a vast range of kids. I know you've probably heard before that when you meet one student with autism, you've met one student with autism. Very rarely do you find students that are alike. They may be similar in some ways. We may be able to group them based on their ability levels and things like that, but their quirks and their nuances and things are unique to them. And so it's hard to say that we know autism, because every time I meet a new student, I learn something new about them and about how autism affects them. So just keep that in mind. When you have a student in your class who has autism, the next student may be nothing like that. And so we have to adjust. So I want to talk about this before we talk about the deficits. It's important in education that we take a strength-based approach. Everybody has strengths. They may be slight and they may be small, but everybody has strengths. And those are the areas that we need to celebrate and that we need to build upon. So I know in special education, especially with an IEP, we focus on those deficit areas because we're trying to bridge the gaps. We're trying to make, the weaknesses not as weak and build those areas. But we also need to look at what the student can do. Students with autism bring a lot of gifts to the table. Like you guys identified, they're creative. They think differently than we do. And so they bring a lot of things to the table, and we need to really capitalize on that. And so I just want you to keep that in mind as you're, developing plans for your classes and things. Think about how you can incorporate that student with autism using their strength. The PE setting is probably the most difficult setting for a student with autism. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the weakness areas. But so sometimes for a student with autism, just being in the gym is a huge success. Just being there. And so we work from there. Some students come in raring to go. They're ready to play. They're ready to engage. So it's really individually based. So build on the strengths that they present when they come in. So looking at the core deficits of autism, there's 3 areas in which a student is diagnosed with autism or found eligible for special education. These are the areas that we look at. So communication, social skills, and restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior or interest. So that's the criteria. And as you look across the spectrum, all 3 of these areas are affected differently based on the performance, the cognitive level of the student. And so we'll talk about it. My experience has mostly been, like I said, on that lower end of the spectrum. But I will try to make sure that I talk about that other end, especially for those of you that are in general PE. So communication differences. Students with autism have challenges in understanding, so that's the receptive communication, understanding what is said to them. And then also using language appropriately for communication, so the expressive and pragmatic. We have students who are completely nonverbal, who may use a picture communication system where we exchange pictures, it's tangible. We have students who may use devices where they have an iPad with an app that communicates for them. So don't assume that just because a student can't speak, that they don't understand. We have some very bright kids in the educational system who are unable to generate the words, but they understand everything that is said to them, and they can respond using those augmentative devices. The pragmatics. So when we talk about the deficit areas, communication and social often overlap, because the pragmatic is the social interaction, right? The use of communication to engage with others, to express wants and needs and things like that. With communication, there's a lot that goes on in communication. There's not just the expressive language, the spoken language, but there's the nonverbal side of communication, which is often a huge struggle for students on the spectrum. So while you may be able to give a typical student a look and they understand what you mean, sit down, pay attention, the student with autism may completely miss that. They may not understand what that look means. You just have a funny expression on your face. They have no idea. So there's a lot of areas of communication that are impacted for our students with autism. Most students with autism also work with a speech language pathologist. I would encourage you to get to know that speech language pathologist and to collaborate with them especially if a device or another type of communication system is used in the PE setting, because we want our students to have a voice everywhere they go. I know a lot of classrooms that I go into, they'll say, oh, it's time for PE, and they walk out and the device sits on the desk. And so we just removed the voice from that student. They have no other way to communicate. And so we want to make sure, you know, if you see a student come into your classroom that doesn't have their device, ask them where it is, ask the teacher where it is, because it's a vital piece of who they are. So the communication differences that you may see from a student with autism is the repetitive use of known familiar phrases. Our students memorize phrases from favorite movies, and they may use those phrases in their communication with you because, you know, they know what it means, they know what they're trying to get, but they may use those phrases or phrases that they've been taught. So you may always get the standard greeting and just have it repeated over and over. Students often have difficulty with volume control. A lot of our students will speak or vocalize very loudly and not really be able to moderate that, you know, they're inside. I know in PE, our students, that's the one place that they can be loud, but there's a certain time for that, right? When they're playing a game or when they're actively engaged, they can be loud to an extent. But when you're giving directions, that's not a time that you want someone speaking loudly. They also have difficulty with their intonation. So it might appear robotic. They may not intonate their words, and so it comes out as kind of flat. And so getting meaning from that intonation is very difficult. I mentioned this before, but understanding language and concepts, figurative language is very hard. And as educators, we use figurative language a lot. But it's a difficult concept for them to understand. Often we have to do direct, explicit instruction in that figurative language. Like if you say it's raining cats and dogs, they may take it literally. And they're like, there's no cats and dogs. But, you know, that's something we have to explicitly teach. Difficulty answering questions. And I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, but a lot of times our kids with autism have processing delays. I had a student once who I would ask a question, I would re-ask the question, and he's looking at me, and I mean, you know, you can see the wheels turning, but he's just not responding to me. So I did a little experiment and I timed him. I asked the question once and then I waited. And it literally took him 30 seconds to respond. So every time I re-asked that question, he was starting over in his response. So my repetitive asking was actually hindering him in responding. Also, our students with questions, you know, our questions are when, where, what, why, how. Those are hard concepts, especially the why. And so we work with students for years on the WH questions and understanding that when you ask who, it's a person, when you ask where, it's a place, and things like that. Why is the most difficult, and we usually don't see that worked on until upper elementary or middle school. So if you ask a student, why did you do that? They may not be able to understand or respond because they don't know that concept yet. There's also a lack of reciprocity. So that back and forth in communication. We often work with students with autism on making multiple exchanges with a communication partner. So if you say, how are you? They may or may not respond. If they do respond, they may or may not ask you the same, which is usually the reciprocal response. When you say, how are you? I say, I'm fine, how are you back? Those behaviors are taught. The big piece to remember with communication is behavior is a main way of communicating. Behavior is communication. So our students who we haven't developed a communication system for, or we haven't found what works for them, or we take their voice away by leaving that device on the desk when they go to another setting, the only option they have is to communicate with behavior. So if you think about it, kind of like a 2-year-old communicates with their behavior when they're upset. They may hit, they may elope, they may, if they want to leave the situation, they may remove themselves from the situation without telling you. And so we always look at behavior as a form of communication. Students with autism have difficulty with executive functioning, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but executive functioning allows you to plan and process things. So usually the behavior that students with autism exhibit is not a planned behavior. So they're not doing something to get under your skin. They're not purposefully acting a certain way to make you upset. They're honestly trying to communicate because they lack that executive function skill to be able to plan that far ahead. So how can you support communication? You want to be clear and concise. As educators, we like to talk. We like to use words. We like to, explain things to the nth degree. But with students with autism, you want to be as clear and concise as possible. Less words is more. So the less you can speak, the more they're going to be able to process and understand. Positive feedback. Tell them what they're doing right. Give that positive praise, even for the most minor thing. For some of our kids, it's huge because, they're doing it right. They got it. And so acknowledging that is very important, especially if you want to see that behavior again. It's best if you do not require eye contact or body proximation. Eye contact has been found through neuro testing and studies, requiring eye contact has actually been found to be physically painful for some of our students. As a young teacher starting out, I had no idea about that. And I used to require eye contact from a student. And I mean, you could physically see the pain on his face as he tried to look at me directly. Body proximation, sometimes our kids will, they may be looking the other way, but they will proximate their body towards you as a speaker. Some will not. Some will turn their back. That doesn't mean they're not listening. It doesn't mean they're not hearing you and understanding you. It's just that physical, they can't do it. And so we need to respect that. It is something that we work on because we do want our students as they get older to be able to work and hold a job. And that is a skill that you need, but it takes time to develop. There may be a literal interpretation of what is said. So we often use, okay, we're going to switch in 2 minutes, or we're going to do this for 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes, right? Because we lose track of time, or we're just trying to fill in time. But if you say 5 minutes, that student is going to hold you to that 5 minutes, especially if they have the skill of telling time. And so a lot of things will be very literal. joking with our students. We encourage people to joke with them because that's how they learn. And we have some students that are really funny, who have a great sense of humor, but sometimes their humor falls flat because they don't really understand what they're saying or what the joke is. Be patient. Like I said, your environment is one of the most difficult environments for our students with autism. So be patient. If we make it in the door, that's success. If we throw a ball, that's great. And then learning the method of communication. If the student has a device, invest the time in learning how to navigate that device. Help them flip those pages and show you what they want. Some students with a device are simply working on yes or no. And so it depends on where the student is, but work with that SLP. Sometimes the students can show you. We have kids that are really gifted in navigating those devices, even at an early age. So sometimes if you say, show me, they can show you where it is. So like I said before, don't make assumptions. Students with autism can often they may understand part of the interaction. They may not get the whole interaction, but they may understand part of it. They may get part of the social problem solving. So if they encounter a difficulty, somebody has a toy or a piece of equipment that they want, how do they get it? They know they can ask you, but then what's next? So they may understand part of it, but not all of it. They may get part of the communication or part of the rules, but not all of it. So don't just assume they don't understand, because they may get parts, but not all. So this is the visual I wanted to show you with communication. So the guy in the yellow shirt's just asking, how are you? The student in the green shirt has autism. These are all the things that we are teaching and that we are working on with this student with autism. You know, knowing what to say next. The student really likes trains. A lot of our students really like trains. And so that's the restricted area of interest. And so that's his go-to. I don't know what to say to how are you, so I am going to say something that I'm familiar and I'm comfortable with. But then, you know, it's not just what am I saying, it's how do I act? How do I hold my hands? How do I adjust my body to this interaction? There's a comment that the freckle on the guy's nose looks like a train. So it's all these things that are going on for that one simple interaction of how are you? Communication and social interactions are more complex than we think of because we know how to do it, right? We learned at an early age. But for those that have skill deficits in this area, it's very hard. And there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to process. And so just keep that in mind when you're talking to a student with autism. If they have a lot going on, their communication may be delayed, but it's not that they don't understand. Jillian, I want us to take a minute. Do we have any questions or anything?
No questions. A lot of people are saying that everyone can help the student use their communication system. They're also saying that behavior is, you know, a lot of the behavior that they're seeing is what they're using to communicate, especially somebody wrote, especially when my students are not feeling well.
Yes. Yes, that is one of our most challenging, is teaching them how to communicate when they're not feeling well. All right, great. Yeah, communication, I mean, when you look at behavior, always look at it as a form of communication. What are they trying to tell me right now? And that will help. So the next area is social skills. So autism is a social communication disorder. Like I said, you can't really talk about communication without talking about social. They may be genuinely confused or overwhelmed in social situations. These are skills that we have to explicitly break down, teach, model, practice, problem solve. A lot of times, I primarily worked in middle school, and a lot of times a student would have an interaction with another student and it would go awry. And so we'd have to pull that student in. We would model, what they could have done, and then we would kind of problem solve. Well, this is what you did, and this is the response you got. So what could we have done differently? And then model that and problem solve through that. So responding in the moment is often hard for kids with social skills. As a society, we have a lot of unwritten social rules. It's things we just know, right? We know not to interrupt people because that's an expectation of our society. Students with autism don't automatically know those unwritten rules. And so we have to teach them. Whereas a typical student may see another student doing the skill and they're like, oh, I should do that. And so they mimic, they model after other students. Our students with autism often don't pick up on those nuances. I will say our high functioning students do. They often can mimic behavior. Now, they often do not pick the good behavior to mimic. They're picking the behavior that gets them the most response. But they are able to kind of be a chameleon and adjust and adapt to what the other people are doing in their group. So that's kind of the higher level skills. But it's, as this quote says, it's like everyone's playing a complicated game, but I'm the only one that doesn't know the rules. And so that was from a Martian on the Playground. It's a book about a student with autism and engaging. So when we talk about social impairment, like I said, communication is not only verbal, it's also nonverbal. Sometimes reading those social gestures and facial expressions are really hard. So even though you're showing a smile and you're happy, a student with autism may not be able to process that you're really happy. Sometimes we can be sarcastic and have a smile on our face. That's really hard to figure out, right? Especially if we're being sarcastic in not such a nice way, but we're smiling about it. Knowing how to position, where to put their hands and things like that, understanding social gestures of like shaking hands, things along those lines. Forming relationships with others. A lot of times it is assumed that a student with autism doesn't mind being alone, that they really don't want friends, that they really don't care. We've found that that's really not true. Most of our kids with autism want to fit in. They want to be invited to that birthday party just like the other kid does. They want to have somebody to come sleep over. They want to call somebody on the phone to go to the movies or to the mall. But forming those relationships, moving from the acquaintance level to the friendship level is significantly difficult. It's really a 6-step process to be able to move along that continuum. A lot of our kids get stuck in that acquaintance level. They see these kids at school, they see them in class, but nothing else. There's no communication outside of school. So they never really move to that friendship level. They will say that that student is their best friend because to them they truly are. But forming those relationships is difficult. And if you think about it in terms of being in a PE class, you guys have huge classes. There's lots of kids, there's lots of little social groups in there, right? And so if you don't fit in, figuring out how to fit in is very challenging. They also have difficulty responding to another listener's interests. So this is where that restrictive, repetitive behavior comes in. If you say, you know, this weekend I saw a great movie and you want to talk about that movie, that word movie may trigger them to talk about their own favorite movie. And then they kind of overpower the conversation with their own interests. Adapting to different social environments, even in the PE setting, you have a lot of different social environments. You have locker rooms. You have the main gym area where you may congregate everybody. Then you have maybe breakout sports or activities that they do in smaller groups. Those are all different social environments within the same larger environment. You have to know how to navigate each one of those separately, which can be really hard. The last thing is our students with autism often have difficulty with empathy. So if a friend falls down, gets hurt, they know the friend's hurt, but it didn't happen to them. And so they don't feel the pain or what, and so they don't really know how to respond to that. They see their friends crying and upset, but they're okay. And so understanding that theory of mind, that someone thinks differently and feels differently than you do, can be really challenging for our students. So needs that impact social skills, like I said, the ritualistic or repetitive thoughts and interests that can often overpower social conversations and social interactions. Our general ed typical students are typically pretty good about being tolerant, right? Some more than others. But they get tired of talking about the same thing. Often our kids with autism will seek out adults because we are more stable. We are more, we react the same way more consistently than, let's say, a 14-year-old does. And so often the student may seek you out over a peer. Processing speed. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Some of our students are quick processors and they're responding before you've even finished your sentence. Other students can take 30 seconds or longer to process what you said. Sensory regulation is a big one for PE because a lot of our, and we're going to talk about sensory in just a minute, but a lot of our students can't regulate their sensory input, and PE is loud. And so our students that are highly sensitive to noise may have difficulty. We have accommodations that we can provide, like a noise canceling headset, but some of our kids don't want to wear that. They don't want to look different than their peers. And so navigating that's really difficult. Some of our kids, if you get them started in a game, they get really excited, especially if they really enjoy it. And so then they get overwhelmed by that excitement, and we may see some behaviors. Impulse control and self-regulation kind of ties into that sensory regulation. This is where you may see attempts at elopement for that impulse control, or if there's an activity the student wants, they may go directly to it and ignore all your instructions. Motivation. Kids with autism are very particular about what motivates them. Sometimes finding what motivates them can be a challenge. Perspective taking is another huge one. Like I talked about a minute ago, that theory of mind, understanding that someone has different thoughts and feelings than you, understanding that someone can think differently than you. So you may give them an instruction and they may be like, well, why? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. This is how we should do it. And then it becomes kind of an argument, and they're not intentionally trying to argue. They just don't understand your perspective. Joint attention. So that's the ability to have those back and forth conversations. A lot of our kids have anxiety. I mentioned the executive function and then the big picture thinking. That if I do this first, then I get to do this next. And understanding what's going on in the bigger picture all affects social skills.
Joy, we have some questions. Is this a good time to ask?
Sure.
So one of the questions is if they have communication devices at school that the school is using, but they don't go home, how can they find it's hard because then they're not using it at home to reinforce it. Some tips to get the parents to use it at home.
So sometimes those communication devices can be overwhelming for the parent as well. And I try to put myself in the place of a parent, right? We have these kids for 8 hours, 6, 7 hours. That parent has these kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they may do what they need to do to get by, to keep life as easy as they can. So when we often encounter that parents aren't using the communication device, they're not using the picture exchange, even though we've sent it home. I would say the device should go home, even if it's a school device, it should go home, it should transition. We often offer those parents training, come in, we'll sit down with you, we'll navigate it with you and show you, and use the phrases or things that would be most meaningful at home. That's often helpful, just having that one-to-one time with the parent to go over that. And sometimes parents just refuse. It's just one more thing that they can't do. And no matter how much we explain it, that it's necessary and needed, it's just not within their skill set at that time. And so we do have to honor that and just do our best that we can.
Okay, and then another question is, what kind of interest inventories do you recommend?
So there's a lot of interest inventories. Typically, the special education teacher should have done motivation assessments, interest inventories, because there's a couple of different ways you can do them. The one I like the most is having the equipment or the objects present and seeing which one the student goes to the most. You do a couple different trials and see which one the student goes to the most. And then that's usually the most motivating for the student.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. All right, so this is just an example. So when we look at social skills, let's take the greeting. We have to identify who, we have to identify the what. What do I need to say? How do I deliver that message? How long do you greet somebody? Because you don't want to stand there and shake their hand for 5 minutes. That's awkward, right? And then identifying the appropriate context. If the person you want to talk to is across the room, that's not an appropriate context to greet them with. Although students do it all the time, right? Teacher walks in or the principal walks in and they yell from across the room, "How you doing?" When we look at greetings, we want to be as similar to their typical peers as possible, right? So a lot of our kids will say hello the same way. So if I see you in the morning and then I see you throughout the day, I'm gonna give you the same greeting. I had a student who did this. He came to me from elementary school and his standard greeting was, "Hello, how are you?" It wasn't reciprocal. It was just, he had been taught to say, "Hello, how are you?" Not many 6th graders greet somebody with "Hello, how are you?" Right? They say, "What's up? How you doing?" They use different slang phrases. So then that's where we go from the social skill, the ability to actually ask or to engage in it, to the social understanding of why the social event should be important to them and how it impacts the other person. Using the same greeting may make the other person feel kind of awkward, or, you know, I just saw you and I just said hello 2 minutes ago. And so then how do you adjust your greeting based on that? I worked for years with that student to say, what's up? Instead of hello, how are you? And when I left the classroom to go to another position before he left, we still had not mastered, because it was so ingrained in him. But so if we say it in a nuanced way, we may say hi, and then the next time we may say hi again and give a little laugh, right? Like, I just saw you, but I'm going to say hi again. And then we may not say anything. We may just smile and nod. These are the nuances and stuff that our kids don't understand. So in PE class, kid says hello to another student when he comes in, says hello again after he sees him in the locker room. Then you put him in the same group with him and he says hello again in the same standard way. That's awkward. And so we really want to work with the kids to teach them these nuances of, well, you just said hello, so maybe just nod, maybe wave. All right, so right now we're going to do a little group activity. We're going to put you in breakout rooms for, I think, 6 minutes. It's not very long, but long enough. So Matthew is a student with autism who's been walking on the playground in the perimeter of a group of students playing basketball. You know that Matthew likes basketball and wants to join the game. So think about this from your perspective. What skills does he need to join? What social understanding does he need to join? What social skills does he need to play? And then what social understanding does he need to play? So this is something that could very well happen in your PE class. So just think about it from that social perspective. How would you support Matthew in joining this basketball game with his peers? All right.
She's setting up the,
Okay.
we have Katie today instead of Amber, so she's setting up the breakout rooms real quick. You said 6 minutes, right, Joy?
Yeah, let's do 5.
Okay.
I'm talking a little too much. I'm looking at the time.
Let's see if there's any questions while we're waiting for.
I was going to say, Joy, you are definitely not talking too much. We are like sponges here.
Yeah.
Everybody's enjoying this presentation. I'm getting text messages from people how good this is. So that's pretty cool.
Good.
Someone said to print out a duplicate of their individual device or program, or the motor planning they established using the AAC will be wrong if it's a different format. So some kids use different formats on their boards.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Someone also said backup devices are great. Paper versions can be laminated and used at bath time or in the rain, which we don't think about that sometimes. And tech sometimes breaks. So we don't want communication to stop because the device is getting fixed.
Exactly. Usually we can provide a replacement device, but you can print those communication boards and laminate them, which, you know, may be better to bring PE than an actual device. Mm-hmm. But still giving them a way to communicate.
I was just about to ask, I know a lot of what we hear from PE teachers is the child might bring the device to class, to PE, but then they just tell them, go put it on the stage, on the steps. And then they're in the class without the device. You know, they're worried on how they can incorporate the device with the student doing activities.
Yeah, I mean, most of the devices come in that case that you cannot break. Right. And the student, a lot of devices have a strap that the student can wear it on their body. That's what I would encourage, is the student keep it on their body at all times, even if they're playing a game. you know, if the device gets broken, it's a device. We can replace the device. So I wouldn't be as concerned with that as them not having their voice.
Okay, we are ready for breakout rooms.
Okay.
Let's see if it's going to go. There we go. All right, so they should be, most everybody should be in a room.
Okay. I am going to have to pick up my pace because I got a lot more to go.
I was going to say, I see you have 49 slides there.
Yeah.
Great information though. We really are.
It really
just
is.
looking at all.
I do want to get to the interventions though, so
Okay.
I'll talk less on some of these other slides.
Okay.
I told you I could talk about this all day.
We've got a gal that's from a private school out in Southwest, and she did put a comment about she's never seen a device, so I don't know. I'm guessing she doesn't even know what it looks like. So, you know, if you're talking about iPads or something in particular.
Yeah, it's usually an iPad with just
Yeah.
an app downloaded.
Okay. If she asks
Some-
that question.
Some
we'll
kids
just-
can use like a talk. A cheap talk is what they're called. It's just like 4 squares or something.
Mhm. Oh, I remember them from my Loudon days.
Yeah.
Oh, we have them here in Virginia Beach too, but yeah. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
great information. Vanessa Wiggin is our DOE person. She's had a little difficulty again with internet this morning, so I sent her the link and she's, I think, on her phone. But she said this is fabulous. So, and then Deb, you know, Deb Johnson from DOE, she's also on the call, on the meeting.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, this is great because we get questions all the time about using devices and communication in PE. So
yeah,
hopefully this will help them better understand.
I need one of those cases for my iPad.
Right.
Oh my God, I drop it all the time.
We have the field days in Loudon and one of the kiddos put it down somewhere. And after field day was over, everybody was like, where is the device? Because he was just having so much fun. He set it down and they were like, we can't leave without the device. We found it. But it's like panic because that's how they communicate.
Yeah.
Joy, do you need a bio break? We'll stop talking your
Oh
ear.
no,
Okay.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
It's a lot of talking. This is the first time I wasn't put in a room. I guess we have a different host today, which is
Yeah.
fine.
Amber, I had emailed her yesterday and she's like, no problem. And then Katie sent me a message and said that she was doing it today. So
Yeah, I got that message too.
Yeah, I may skip the next breakout. It was a hard one.
Yeah, this is a great group, don't get me wrong, but they've struggled a little bit toggling from the presentation to, well, the breakout's easy because it just puts them there. But when we used other platforms, we got a few dings on our evaluation, which is okay. I mean, we needed to hear that, and we've tried to just say, don't worry if you can't get in or it's not comfortable, don't do it.
Yeah, Zoom is easy to use. I'm very surprised.
It's easier than Meet as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
but when I
Yeah.
observe teachers, I have to use both.
we're so used to using Google all year. When I emailed Joy, she was like, I'm not sure about Zoom. I was like, I felt the same way on Monday when we got on here, but it's actually pretty easy to use.
It is.
Yeah.
The hard part is if you have multiple screens that you're going to share,
Yeah.
and just minimizing the screen to find the right thing to share. But one PowerPoint's not too bad.
No. And Joy, when you're done today, if you want to send me your PowerPoint, we have our drive set up so that they can access all the presentations from this week, just to kind of review materials. So I can put it in the drive for them so that they can kind of go back. It's especially if you have to skip over some slides, they'll still have that information.
Yeah, I can do that.
And do you have a Twitter? Because I've been putting everybody's Twitter pages also in our folder so that they can access them.
The Twitter that I use is
Is it
my
LCPS Autism?
Autism.
Yeah, I've been tagging that one.
Perfect. I think I might have that one in here.
Looks like they're coming back in.
Oh, good. Great.
Sheila, quick question, please.
Yep, go ahead, Dave.
Where does that ladder behind you go?
So this is a storage area. When I had a wall taken down, so I needed a pantry. So it goes up to a top layer of storage containers. It's so funny you ask that. Everybody wants to know. Sometimes I have to pick up my laptop and show people. The other side is barn doors, and that's my pantry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I like that very much. Our house was built in 1910, so we have 12-foot ceilings.
Mhm.
So we have cabinets, kitchen cabinets that go to the top
Oh,
of the
yeah.
ceiling. So you need a step ladder to
Right.
reach those cabinets.
So it slides, and there's a stopper on the bottom that I can put the brake on so I don't slide all over. My nieces love to ride back and forth on it. You can just push yourself off the walls. But yeah, a carpenter did it for me.
How far does it go?
Oh, it's probably 6 to 8 feet. It's a little hallway that goes up to the room above the garage. So it was unused space, and now it's being used.
See, now
Joy,
I want to see. Can you pick up your laptop?
Stay on at the break, and I'll show you.
Okay, I want to
Okay,
tour.
sure.
Thank you.
Joy, do you need any more breakout rooms today? Because Katie up ahead of
No,
time.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I'm running short on time, so I want to make sure I get to everything.
Okay, great.
So if someone would like to volunteer to unmute and tell me what your group talked about, what social skills are needed to join.
Well, I'll unmute and just say that we realized right away that we felt like we were missing some key information about Matthew. We instantly went, oh, well, wonder how far on the spectrum our friend Matthew is, because that really dictated to us where we felt like, oh, geez, this is a much bigger task than we, so we immediately, because we were like, okay, well, because we knew that, okay, well, it would tell us a lot about how much we needed to assist in facilitating the teaching of skill on how he needed to ask to join, and how much understanding we may need to instruct upon in terms of his understanding of what it's going to take to join.
Right.
Can I just say that my group, the first thing we talked about was asking that Matthew how we can help. So allowing him the opportunity to even engage, like, hey, Matthew, what kind of supports do you need us, your teachers, to get you into the basketball game? And then we talked about there would have to be some type of a greeting or exchange of how can I get into the game? And then other social cues we talked about, like success, sharing the ball, so we're not a ball hog, we can pass it around, high fives if someone has that good shot, talking to the group ahead of time. If we know that, Matthew's there and his class is there might be kids with different needs and different ways to help. How can we as a whole group support them as well too, and understand that things might be different? Then we kind of talk about what Rob talked about yesterday, and I know you weren't here yesterday, Joy. So he talked about teacher modeling. So maybe that teacher can get into the game with Matthew, and right away, if there's some TAs with them that can monitor the class, students might be attracted to that game, and then we can scaffold out of the game as a teacher. And then Matthew has some friends who he's playing with all the time. And then lastly, someone in my group talked about rewards and tokens. So I'll leave it as that as the next group goes on.
No, that's great. I mean, you identified the skills he needs to play, the understanding that he needs. Unfortunately, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because there are a lot of other slides to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from here. But those were great conversations that you had regarding Matthew. But yes, a lot more information would be needed. Jillian.
We had two people with their hands raised. I didn't know.
Oh, I'm
if,
sorry. I can't
that's
see
okay.
that.
I know you probably can't see it on your screen. We had Andrea and Kelly had their hands raised.
Okay, go ahead.
Andrea said, never mind. Kelly, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Okay.
I'm sorry. Why now my slide's not moving? There we go. All right. So I've mentioned this a couple times, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the repetitive restrictive behaviors, the preoccupation with their own interests. This one, the preoccupation with fairness and rules, especially for other people, comes into play a lot in PE. Our kids can be little policemen and monitor the behavior of others more than they monitor their own behavior. And so if they feel that something's unfair or that rules aren't being followed exactly as they were told, they often have difficulty with that because what you said is what should be done. And so if kids aren't following that, they have problems with that. There's also a strong desire to have things remain the same. So if you play, I'll just use basketball. If you play a game of basketball one day and it was a group of, let's say, 4-on-4, then that's how it should be played every day. So they really like things to stay the same. So having those conversations and helping them process that is often necessary. I've mentioned this a little bit, the sensory stimuli, difficulty with noise, smells, focusing. Some of our kids don't want to do anything, but our other kids are in constant motion, and even sitting for instruction is hard. The personal space issue is a huge one. A lot of our kids will come up very close to our face when they want to talk. It is okay, and it is expected that you would correct that behavior. Don't just step back and let it continue, but make it explicit to that student. Put your arm out and say, this is my space, that's your space, stay in your space. It's okay to do that. That's how they learn. And sometimes the kids are working on it in the classroom and we need to generalize it to another location. So that PE is perfect for that. But it is okay to make those corrections. Motor abilities. I wanted to talk about this just briefly because a lot of our kids, even the kids that are higher on the spectrum, often have gross and fine motor skill disabilities. So they may run a little awkwardly. They may be more clumsy than the typical kid, have trouble with balance with the vestibular system, and then just navigating where they are in space. They may bump into kids a lot, or they may, not be able to stand in line like they should because they can't find themselves in space. So those are just some things to keep in mind as the motor abilities of our kids. I mentioned earlier too that a lot of kids have comorbid diagnosis. Especially our higher functioning kids experience a lot of depression and anxiety. And we all know how that can affect us when we're asked to engage in something physical if we're depressed. A lot of that stems from the social interactions and the difficulty that they have with social. I think the most difficult one is the oppositional defiant disorder. We see that a lot in those higher functioning kids that are more in the gen ed. A lot of times people will say, I think it's emotional disturbance. I don't think it's autism. They're very much autistic. They just present a little more aggressively than others. They still have the same deficits. And it's still so working on through those deficits, the emotional regulation and things with them is a little more challenging. But typically those are our higher functioning kids. All right, looking at behavior, that's always the key. When we have a student, we want to look at, is it won't do or can't do? If they're having a difficult time in PE or in any class. Is it a skill deficit? They haven't learned the skill yet. They've never been exposed to the skill. Or is it a performance deficit? They know the skill, they've been taught the skill, but they're just unable to perform the skill. That's important because it helps you know where to intervene, right? So if it's a skill deficit, you may need to teach and reteach. If it's performance, they just aren't able to generalize that skill out and they may need more support. And we'll talk about the supports in just a minute. So these are just some examples of signs of stress or behaviors that you may see in the PE setting. Students who are having sensory difficulties, who are not able to communicate what they want. I think the scariest one is the elopement, because you guys are outside a lot. If we have kids that are at elopement risk, typically those kids would come with some extra staff, hopefully, and you would be aware of it, but kids can just walk away without anyone being aware. But these are all just examples that you may see. So this is the section I wanted to get to, the intervention. So it's not just for behavior, but it's also for the social aspect and communication. I don't know how many of you are familiar with positive behavior supports. In Loudoun, it's universal across our schools. So we use a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 model. Tier 1 is, it applies to everyone. It's, you know, your general instructions that apply to everyone. Tier 2 is usually a smaller group, about 15%, who may need more direct instruction, who may need reteaching and modeling. And then tier 3 behaviors are those individualized interventions that we use. This is where an FBA and a behavior plan comes in, where we're teaching replacement behaviors. The key with your interventions is you want to make the behavior less effective, less efficient, and less relevant. So why do they need to use the behavior if they have a way to communicate, right? So we need to make it less efficient. The behavior can't get them what they want quicker than the communication does. So tiered supports for intervention in PE. If we look, this is the tiered approach, the RTI model, response to intervention. So tier 1, like I said, is your daily interventions. Tier 2, strategic interventions that are for a smaller group. And then tier 3 is your customized interventions. So when we're intervening, it's important, it's all about the interaction, right? So you need to make sure that you've set expectations prior to instruction. Let them know if you expect them to sit and listen. Put yourself in proximity, put them in proximity to you. Identify positive peers. Kids want to help. You know, especially in elementary school, we see the girls. It's almost like they're little mothers. But they want to help their peers. They want to see people succeed. So identify those positive peer buddies. Use the positive reinforcement. It's free and it's easy. Telling someone good job for sitting on your spot while I gave directions isn't hard to do. And it can go a long way. And then you want to act but not react. So doing the antecedent type interventions that happen before the behavior. If you see something starting to spiral upwards, you can act and put an intervention in place. So we're going to kind of run through what this would look like in PE. So I'm going to take you through an entire class of PE with the different tiers of intervention. So when the kids first enter the classroom, your first activity may be an instant activity, right? So your tier 1, this is about 80% of the students. You've taught them to read the board for instructions. They go, they do it. Your tier 2 is your 15%, who may need you to reteach the use of the board or model it for them. And then tier 3 is your proximity to the individual instruction on how to use the board. So it might be one-to-one, teaching that student again how to use the board. So after the instant activity, you're preparing the class for instruction. The desired behavior is you want them to sit at their designated spot. It's always important that you've identified that desired behavior and then think about what you need to do to get the student there. So here, the tier 3 intervention is the peer model leads the student to the spot. You may have the peer sit side by side with the student right in front of you where you're going to be giving those instructions. They have a friend, the peer shows them what to do. So the next one is the desired behavior is to sit quietly and listen to your instructions. This is probably the most challenging activity in all of PE for students on the spectrum. It's challenging for typical kids, right? They got some energy, they want to burn it. So they're eager to play. So you may use signals at the tier 1. You know, we all do the clap to get their attention, and then you model it. Your tier 2, you check for understanding by having them say it back to you. For tier 3, it may be first you sit, then we play. As clear as that. And some students may come to PE with an if-then board that have picture icons that first I sit, then I play basketball. And that helps the student understand what's happening to them. So you begin the activity. Tier 1, you just say go. They go. They do. Tier 3, you may need to have a peer model explicitly help the student with support. And then you're practicing the designated motor skills and activities. You give a signal as feedback. So you may give them a high five, you may give a thumbs up. They understand. For the tier 2, you may describe, see what Johnny's doing over there with the ball. That's what I want you to do. See how he's throwing it up? And then your tier 3, you may, or a TA, if a TA comes with the student, you may have to physically assist the student in doing the skill or to reteach it. At the end, you give a signal to put the supplies away, put the equipment back. You say stop and clean up. 80% of those kids are going to do it. You may have that 15% who needs more verbal instructions for putting it away, and then your tier 3 is a peer helper. Again, at dismissal, sometimes this can be a longer period of time depending on your timing of the activity. Sitting in the designated spot and then line up. This is where your teacher proximity comes in. If you're standing close by to the student, it helps them understand more what they're supposed to do. I will say some of our students, we do allow to leave early, so they may miss this part to go to avoid a crowded hallway or to get to their next class. So this was going to be another breakout group, but we're going to skip it because I'm really short on time. So the scenario was students are learning to play floor hockey. You know, what's the desired behavior? And then breaking it down to the tier 1 and tier 3. This might be an activity that you want to do on your own just to give yourself the exercise of practicing how would you address the different tiers of intervention within a PE class. So as educators, what can we do to support students with autism? One of the first things we can do is modify expectations, meet them where they're at. You want to modify materials. That's especially important in like the classroom portion of PE, the health portion of PE, modifying the materials to a level that they can understand. Using specific seating arrangements, often letting kids pick where they sit is not often helpful, but pairing them with peers, and then how they're supposed to respond. In PE, do they have to raise their hand if they have a question? Or are they going to look awkward if they raise their hand? So set those clear expectations from the beginning. Use first then. It's very simplified language, but it's very direct. So first you're going to do this, then. A lot of our students with autism may have difficulty with multi-step directions. And so they need it broken down to the smallest segments that they can do. Teach and reteach. This is for expectations, rules, behaviors, routines. Our kids are often very routine oriented, and so they rely on those routines. So teach them, reteach them. Give kids a choice whenever possible, especially our higher kids who may exhibit some control type behaviors. Give them a choice. You can do this or you can do this. Those are your two acceptable choices. Pick one. And they typically will. Using peer support. Again, peers are very critical. It also helps our kids feel included, and it starts to develop those friendships. Use student interest. We're going to talk about this a little bit in more detail. Visuals. I can't express visual supports enough. Most of our students are not auditory processors. They are visual processors. And so if you can provide them a picture, it takes a lot of that processing time away because they can process a picture a lot faster than they can process the spoken word. And so anything that you can label or that you can provide a visual for is going to be helpful. Activity schedules, social stories, scripts. This is where you can collaborate with the special education teacher. If you know you have an activity coming up that may be a little challenging or is new for the student, let that teacher know. She can write a social story that today in PE, I'm going to play floor hockey. Never played floor hockey before. She can go over the expectations, the rules, all those things in those stories. Do that before class, then they come in prepared. Use timers. Our kids often want to know exactly how long they have to do something. They want to know when it's going to be over and what they're going to do next. And so that's where timers can come in. We use visual timers that have a red thing on them that goes away over time. Auditory timers can be a little difficult, especially the gem, the clock, the buzzer. That can be a little difficult, but we have these timers that can travel anywhere. You can set it on the bleacher so the kid can see it. And but that just helps them kind of control their own environment. This is probably the biggest thing, is collaborating with the special education staff. Whether it's a TA that comes to PE with the student or the special educator, you are a member of the team. I know in all the IEP meetings I sit in, the PE teacher is usually the general education teacher, because you guys get pulled in a lot for that. You are a valued member of the team. You need to know the plan, but you also need to be able to ask for support when you need it. So communicate with each other, have an open line, let the teacher know ahead of time what you're going to be doing in class so she can prepare the student. You know, when I was a teacher, I had a student who was in general ed PE. We had a lot of struggles and a lot of accommodations put in place, but you know, they let me know when he was going to run the mile, and I was right out there with him running the mile because he needed that level of support to do it. So because I knew ahead of time, I was able to prepare to do that. Have realistic expectations. I think a lot of times as special educators, we expect more of our students than we do of typical kids. We expect better behavior. We expect a lot of things that we don't expect from other kids. And so set those realistic expectations. What do you expect from Johnny that, you know, you wouldn't expect from Sam? And make it equal as you can. And then if something's not working, don't be afraid to change it or to try something different. If you're not sure, talk to the special educator, run it by them and see what they think. But like for my student, that period of time from when they came out of the dressing room to when directions were given was too much. It was too long of a period of time for everybody to get into the gym. And so we set up that he would come a little later, which also cleared out the locker room for him. And then we did a pre-activity in the auxiliary gym. And then he came in just for the directions when they were ready. And so it eliminated a lot of that wait time that he wasn't able to handle. And so if you do have TAs in there with you, use them to support activities like that, especially if there's an area of struggle. Again, visual supports. I cannot express this enough. These are capitalize on those visual strengths. You can use picture cues, checklists. You can make your instructions visual. So when you're giving them verbally, they're following along. Especially kids that can read. They can read along with you. It doesn't always have to be a picture. The schedule of events, the first, the then, the next, the final. Have it up on the wall if you can, or sometimes we just give the student a little strip that has the sequence for them. Label the environment. You know, if balls go in a certain place, put a picture, put a label there. And then task analysis, just breaking down those larger steps, those larger instructions, breaking it down to its smallest component. So then it becomes, first we're going to do this, then we'll do this. Because like I said, a lot of our kids struggle with multi-step directions, retaining that information to be able to perform. 2 minutes. All right, capitalize on their interests. Kid likes Pokemon, talk to them about Pokemon. Use it if they need to run a certain number of laps, have them, you know, catch a Pokemon on each lap. A lot of kids like trains. Incorporate that in there. Lots of options there. But the more you can add that in, that's motivating for them. It also shows them that you're interested in who they are, that you're interested in what they're interested in, which can be a huge motivator. Supporting instructions. You guys, I know as PE teachers, model and demonstrate pretty much everything you do, which is big for our kids with autism. Breaking the task down, I've talked about that. tell them what to do instead of what not to do. Instead of saying, stop that, give them what you want them to do. Please sit down. You know, stop running around versus please sit down are two different types of interactions. You can develop a nonverbal signal. If the student is a student who gets overwhelmed easily, you may have a hand signal with them that if they're starting to feel overwhelmed, they can go get a drink of water, regardless of what's going on. They can excuse themselves from that environment. We've talked about allowing processing time and teaching personal boundaries and space. We've talked about most of these. With our students that do have interfering behaviors, get to know those behaviors. If they have a behavior intervention plan, you should be familiar with that plan, just as any other teacher would be. It'll help you recognize and then also intervene in those behaviors. Be generous with the reinforcement. It's easy, it's free. When you do give reinforcement, use that behavior specific praise instead of just saying good job. Say good job for doing X. Point out specifically what it is they did a good job doing. That way they'll be motivated to do it again. All right, perfect, made it. All right, so overall, today we talked about the core deficits of autism, the sensory difficulties, motor abilities, briefly talked about the comorbid conditions, tiered supports and interventions, and then the evidence-based strategies. So I know it is 10:01. Are there any questions, Jillian?
Nothing. Somebody said build their own schedule has worked great for my kids. Show a list of activities to dictate tasks.
Yeah, letting them have that choice and flexibility to build their own schedule. If you don't care what order it's done in, letting them choose that. I used to do that with a student all the time. I had what needed to be done laid out, and he got to put it in order and also choose where he got a break.
Right.
So that's very helpful.
I don't see anything else. Sheila has dropped the survey for everyone else for today. Thank you so much, Joy. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
Also, for those of you asking, I will put Joy's PowerPoint into her folder in the drive. Somebody said, thank you so much. Awesome, Joy, thanks. Got some thumbs up. Joy, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The wealth of information.
Hey, Joy, I have a question.
Mhm.
So I had a student last year who the policing, remember following the rules, making sure you're doing what you're supposed to do of the other kids, and wanted to always add rules, and we would always have conversations about it. But I have at one time can sometimes have almost 125 kids in my gym. And so what are some things that you can do to make sure that they're heard and not getting frustrated by not being able to respond immediately? Because that was one of the things that we would run into when I was not calling at him in the time that he needed. We would see, of course, the behavior because, he wanted to be heard.
Right. So I would say I would start with a social story that occurred before PE class that outlines that, not the teacher can't call on you all the time. Sometimes if the student is, can write, maybe we have provided kids with like a piece of paper and a pencil, and we say, write it down, and then you can tell me when I'm finished. So it lets them, keep what they had to say. They're still heard. It's just at a later time. I know in PE that might be a little more difficult, having a pencil and paper available. But I would definitely start with the social story, that you can't always call on them all the time, that everybody gets a turn. And that goes into that perspective taking and theory of mind, that, you know, others matter too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, I did a talk time card with one of my kids, which worked out really well. So
Okay.
like they had a visual cue of like their talk time. So they'd have to like hold it up and wait until it was their time to talk. Or they had to work up to having like individual talk time with me. So like, okay, in the next 5 minutes, I need you to go play. And then you can earn your 2 minutes with like Miss Push or like, so it was kind of that autonomy to go do it yourself and then check back in. And it kind of faded out the amount of times they wanted to talk to me, because every 5 minutes they were coming over and then they're like, forget this, I want to just play. So it got a little bit easier to kind of manage the mass amount of conversation that they wanted to have throughout the class.
Right. That's helpful. I mean, and it's one of those things, like I have TAs and they are awesome, but you know, you have those students that they just want to talk to you, nobody else. And so that was my guy and we would talk, but it would make it hard when running, you know, an entire class. So
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
some
you,
of those things
guys.
just were really helpful. Like